As a finance professional in a disrupted business landscape, what does it take to be in demand? What does it take to attract great paying international roles? If you're an ICAN member, it'll just take one exam. That's all it takes to complete the globally recognized SEMA professional qualification and the internationally respected CGMA designation. As a SEMA member and a CGMA designation holder, employers will look at you as a finance professional, constantly acquiring new skills to add value to the business. That's why they'll be willing to pay premium to hire and retain you. If you have 5 years of relevant experience and are an ICAN member, you can directly sit for the final exam of the SEMA Professional Qualification, the Strategic Case Study exam. Start studying the SEMA Professional Qualification. Prepare to make an impact.
Good evening, professional colleagues. Good evening, friend of our great institute. Good evening, students, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to another session of ICAN on Air, powered by our great institute, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria. It's been an interesting week, every Tuesdays and Thursdays, discussing topical issue that will educate, enlighten, and broaden our horizon globally. And I sincerely want to appreciate all our members connecting both within the country and outside the shore of this country. This is a globally accepted program by all. And today we have brought to you another interesting topic, talking about the implication of finance cost on businesses. Let me state here that last week we were to continue the little glitch we had the last time, but that will be bringing to you as soon as the speaker is made available. But today is another interesting topic, implication of finance cost on businesses. And it is my pleasure to welcome a seasoned analyst and erudite scholar, a researcher, Mr. Ayodeji Ebo. He is the current managing director and chief business officer of Optimus by Afrivent, the digital platform powered by Afrivent West Africa Limited, and the chief group business development officer for Afrivent. He has over 16 years of experience in business investment, strategy and economy, and investment research. Before joining Afrivest, he worked as the head of retail investment with Chapel Hill Danton, as well as senior economist, head research and strategy at Greenwich Merchant Bank. He started his research career at the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research. He has served in reputable organizations, including Intercontinental Security Limited. He possesses strong quantitative financial modeling and analytic competency. A member of the authorized dealer clerk of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. He is an associate of the Chartered Institute of Stockbroker, a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountant UK, as well as associate of the Chartered Institute for Security and Investment in UK, a member of the Governing Council of the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers, and has served in many capacities as chairman, co-chairman, annual CIS conference, also a technical committee of the 19th Nigeria Economic Summit. I brought before you today a seasoned analyst, someone who will do justice to the topic of discussion. But before I proceed and bring in my guest, let me quickly go and give you a little announcement to relax while I get you to prepare your pen and your paper as we prepare for another interesting session today. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. I will be right back.
Dear professional colleagues, these are undoubtedly unprecedented times. Social and economic indices are undoubtedly performing below all expectations. No nation is spared, not even the advanced nations. Global community is battling environmental, economic, technological, political, and social challenges all at the same time. Most developing economies are experiencing rising unemployment, spreading inflation, escalating and humiliating poverty, security breaches, trade wars, tensions, political instability, and deteriorating climatic changes with all their consequences. As professional accountants, we must ceaselessly support government and business leaders in charting a robust and viable future without neglecting the current needs. As we strive to prosper financially, we must do so through sustainable methods, creating value while ensuring we pay adequate attention to the climate. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the focus of the ICAN's 52nd Annual Accountants Conference, the theme of which is Nigeria Adopting Sustainability for Economic Prosperity. I invite you all to join us as we learn and relearn from indigenous and international resource persons between October 10 and 14, 2022 at the Abuja International Conference Center. It surely promises to be a truly transformative experience. See you in Abuja in October. Thanks and God bless.
Welcome back, our viewers that are connected globally to this educative session. And like I made during my introduction, I have with me today Mr. Ayodeji Ebo. Good evening and welcome to ICAN on Air.
Good evening, sir, and good evening, everyone. It's a great privilege to be here today.
Yeah, thank you very much for honoring our invitation. Let's go straight to the business as we will be discussing the implication of finance cost on businesses. Let me start with this. Businesses cannot succeed without finance, and finance cannot be discussed without mentioning finance cost. Due to its global relevance in nearly all business discourse, our global viewers and audience want you to share from your experience a pool of knowledge. Educate us. What is finance cost?
Okay, thanks once again. And now, since I'm speaking with accountants, I would like to first define it based on the IAS standard, IAS 23, that defines finance costs as that interest and other costs that an entity incur and in the process of borrowing to finance a particular project. And finance costs, some call it, can also call it borrowing cost, is as a cost. There's no free lunch anywhere. So it can come in form of equity. It can also come in form of debt. And it's to run and finance a project. Some can be short term, some can be long term. And we've seen, typically being practical, we can see in Nigeria in the last 1 or 2 years, we've seen the influx of a lot of issuance of commercial papers, which are short-term debts and are discounted instruments that are used to finance operations. And we've also seen issuance of bonds, corporate bonds, that are used to finance projects. And so when we talk about finance cost, or you want to call it at the borrowing cost, that cost, apart from the interest, there are also associated charges or fees that would also be captured as finance cost, because you would look at it from the perspective that if you are trying to incur or borrow to fund a transaction, all those fees that are also attached to incurring that loan, that debt, would also be added as part of the cost. So it's really an important factor, because it's, when you are running a business, there will always be time, even if you are starting with your personal capital, there will always be time for you to expand. You would require to go and source for capital, whether you are going through equity or you are going through debt. And provider of capital will require a return. And requiring a return, there are factors that drive that return that they will require. And we were talking about businesses. There's always that benchmark of looking at the sovereign, the government instruments. And treasury bills for short term is always like a benchmark, or sometimes currently what we see is the placement rate of deposits is being used as benchmark for commercial paper issuances. And for long term, you use FGM bonds as your basis. So it's really important that that concept, that we understand it, because it also ties, there's a strong correlation to also profitability, because if your cost is significantly high, you may have high turnover in terms of your revenue, but at the end of the day, your profitability will be impacted.
Very simple way to start the day, by just giving us a little and brief, simple definition of what finance cost is all about. You mentioned can also be referred to as a borrowed cost. But from your explanation of this finance cost, it seems to have a direct impact on pricing. And pricing is a major factor in revenue generation, which determine the sustainability of business. Most finance managers struggle between the management of finance costs and efficient pricing. What is your view as regard this?
Okay, thank you. Very interesting question. And there's always that friction, or that you see between, there's the business development officers that are, or the sales guys, as well as when you also look at the accountants. Yes, the accountants most times would also, or the CFO would focus on trying to ensure that the cost is within manageable level. And when you're trying to look at pricing, which means in terms of your costs that you want to sell, the sales price, it's important to also understand the market where you play, to see whether you have that leeway to be able to raise price. Or, when you talk about price, it's about the price. We are talking about revenue. It's about the price and the quantity. So while you are trying to ensure that cost is kept beyond certain level, but if you have that leeway for you to be able to pass that cost to and to the final consumer, then you may not be too mindful of your cost. So for instance, if you study Nestle, which is also listed, most times you see the dividend payout for a company like Nestle in the past few years, you would see that they pay out almost 90 to 95% of their earnings as dividend, and they go out to leverage, to borrow and you will see that, but they know that the kind of business that they do, the demand is inelastic. They sell goods that even if there's an increase in the price of their goods, it would investors or consumers will still go for them, and there are little or limited substitute for their goods. So most times when you are trying to now balance between what price should you charge as well as the cost, the finance cost in terms of the borrowings, you weigh your options. Once you also understand your business, if you know you can't pass it, then it means that your profitability will be impacted. But
Yeah.
it will also get to a level that it may not make any business sense for you to even take on additional loan. There's what we call the optimal structure, that at the end of the day, if you borrow to a level, it may not be adding value to that business again. So it's good to be mindful of that. And it's important that we're able to marry both in terms of the sales, how you're able to support, borrow to sell, borrow to impact your business so that sales can be sustained.
Very well, very well. Temitope, like I told you, our participants, our viewers, our audience are always throwing questions at us. But Temitope, I will get back to you. But that question you are asking, it's under this that I want to bring. But before I go to Tope to ask his question, you've explained to us what finance cost is, its relationship with pricing and revenue generation. Can we say what can we say are the important components, those components of this finance cost when you are evaluating the visibility of businesses? What are those components?
Okay, thanks. And so we look at finance costs. I would like to look at it from these two perspectives. There's one that when you're the interest rates, which is what eventually cascade into the costs. Are you borrowing? Is it a fixed interest rate or floating? You would know that for a lot of credit in Nigeria, it is floating. It's most time tied to the MPR. So if you are borrowing and it's floating, then you also need to be able to factor that and bring in a lot of scenarios into your model, into your feasibility study, so that if there's a change, we've seen in the last 4 or 5 months, we've seen MPR increase twice, from 11.5 to I think 13, now
13.
14%, now 14%. So it means it would impact on lending rates, and that would impact on the model. But if you are also able to put in a contract and sign a fixed rate, so most times it means it may come at a premium, it may be favorable to you or not, depending on the movement of rates. Also, when you are building or developing your visibility study, you need to borrow in the currency that revenue will be generated. See, like Nigeria, for instance, we all know that there's been significant pressure on the naira. So if you are borrowing in foreign currency and the revenue you'll be generating will be in naira, that's a mismatch. There will be significant exposure. Yes, there are businesses like, for instance, in the telecom space, most of their capex will be in dollars, but they would have also anticipate that and also build in a lot of scenarios. But if you are just starting, or you are already in business and you know that your revenue will be in naira, then there's no need going for foreign loans, especially in Nigeria of today, because we are not, when you look at our challenges in terms of solving it, we have not yet started in terms of solving those problems. So I would say that when you are building your visibility studies, apart from the interest, there are also the fixed amount in terms of management fee. How often is the management fee? Is it one-off or is it quarterly? Is there a commitment fee? If it's like OD, that if you don't have the need to use the money and it's been committed, do you need to incur that cost? So these are some of the major cost components that you need to consider when you are building your visibility study, so that to be sure that at the end of the day, it's going to be profitable and the your net present value will be positive.
Very wonderful submission there from Ayodeji on this issue of the implication of finance cost on businesses. We have had businesses, engaging in price war, especially in a competitive market. What influence with finance cost bear in such business environment?
Okay, thanks. And when you um, asked that question, my mind just went directly to the beauty sector.
Hmm.
There's in Nigeria, there's been a lot of stiff competition in that space, and we can see, if not until recently, that they were able to increase price. There were a lot of price cutting, and we saw that impact on that sector.
Hmm.
And they could not pass the increasing cost, some of the excise duty tariffs that were introduced, they could not pass it to the consumers. So pricing war, yes, will always exist. It's part of the business, but it's always good to build a unique proposition. So if you are able to have your unique selling point, you would not need to be cutting price. If it's service that most people see that you have and there's a premium they have to pay for that, if it's in terms of consistency in the quality of your product, and people know that if it is this brand, then you will not need to engage in it, because sometimes it can be a race to zero. That's the way I always put it, that you continue to cut and cut, and at the end of the day,
Hmm.
if you have already borrowed, you cannot go back to your lender and tell them that because of uh, the pressure that is going on within the market, you need to review downwards. It's a fixed rate that your lender will be expecting a return. So that
Hmm.
would have major impact on your business. So it's good to engage and be competitive, but there's also a limit. So, and if you understand your business model and it's really very unique, and you will not need to significantly engage in pricing war,
Hmm.
which may bring business down.
That is very key. Understanding your business model so that you would not kill the business yourself. Let me use this opportunity to tell our listeners globally that we welcome your questions and your contribution on this. Mr. Ayodeji is very much present to do justice to this question. Apart from finance costs, you said there are other attributable costs. We've heard of the phrases like cost of capital, cost of debt. I just want to ask, are they semantics or they mean different things in the business world?
Okay, thanks. And I'm happy I'm speaking to professional colleagues, so it's easier to relate. So when we talk about the cost of capital, that relates to the the weighted average of all the different form of financing, either equity, either debt, or whether it's hybrid. So you are going to have to look at the overall cost. So for companies, their source of financing always differ. Apart from the one that we may say may come cheap, even based on the pecking order theory, is the retained earnings. But beyond that, you would debt would carry would also come with a cost. So it is important that we we note that when we are looking at the overall cost of capital, then when we are talking about cost of debt or cost of equity, if it's cost of equity, it refers to funds that you are borrowing from equity holders. So they own a share, a part of the company, and you are only obliged to pay dividend. Most times they are the last receiver. If the company goes under or is liquidated, it is after debt holders are paid. And when we talk about cost of debt, this has to just do with the interest rates that you are paying on that borrowed funds. Also with, when we started, we defined the finance cost with also the associated costs. So there was a year that I was trying to analyze the Dangote cement industry report, and that was the year they acquired significant amount of trailers. And I was wondering why the cost of sales, because they had to capitalize that cost. It was significant. It was a major item for that particular year because of all the associated costs of
Cost.
acquired associated costs. So there's significant difference when we talk about cost of capital is the overall cost that you incur from the different sources of funds. And when we talk about cost of equity, that has to do with the cost on the funds you are borrowing from your shareholders, those that are invested or own a part of the company. And when we talk about cost of debt, that has to do with the interest that you'll be paying to those that are lending you funds to run your business. And most times it's always blended to have an average so that you know the overall cost of your business.
Thank you very much for that wonderful explanation. And like I mentioned to you, our viewers are connected globally. I have seen some talking to us all the way from Sierra Leone. We have people connected even from Canada, from US, from UK to this educative session. And let me take Fagbola's question. He's asking that what is your take on the perpetual borrowing by the government to finance epileptic economy of the nation that are not yielding positive results?
Okay, thanks. Very intelligent question. So when we look at the Nigerian economy, we would see that the more we borrow, the less the effectiveness of the budget. We can see the financial or budget performance as at April that was published by the budget office, that the amount used to service debt is significantly higher than the actual revenue that were earned within that period. So it means that if we want to look at it indirectly, we're actually borrowing to even service the debt, because if you assume that the money you've made 1 billion and you need 1.2 billion to service your debt, that means you have to borrow or restructure from somewhere additional 200 million. So it's really pathetic. And most time borrowing, like we would say, is not bad in itself. But when you see that you are even borrowing to service debt, then you move to borrowing to pay salaries. You look for borrowings for other non-productive sectors. You are not expecting any cash flow, any benefits, like accountants, like we would say, economic benefit from those borrowings. Then at the end of the day, it's really kicking the can down the road. It's really a crisis situation, because assuming the borrowings are going into capital projects, using it as seed capital on projects, then we would expect that there will be an economic benefit that would be derived from it in the future. So I would say that it's really pathetic and is looking unsustainable. The only saving grace that we have is that we just have that ability and control over the naira. So you would see that as at today, the CBN has supported the government with close to about 17 trillion naira through ways and means, which is significant. So beyond when we talk about the impact of inflation coming from cost push, there's that side that money supply is also fueling and pushing inflation upward. So it's really a very sorry state, and there needs to be a drastic action of creating an environment so that I don't only talk about the problem. Government may create, assuming we have that enabling environment for private sector to be able to handle some of these projects that they have to now try to raise money for. then we'll believe that we're on the road, on the journey to solving this problem, such that income can be generated from some of these businesses, or when infrastructure but cost of doing business is low, it will really ease transportation and businesses, and that will be able to enjoy that economic benefit, and government will be able to have more taxes from increased productivity.
Very wonderful submission, and I'm sure Fat Bola has actually picked that up. It's a sorry state, but you and I have a lot to contribute to make sure that we'll get things on track. While you are actually attending to Fat Bola's question, you made mention of something relating to inflation. And one factor that usually affect businesses is that thing you mentioned of, that is inflation, which involves price increase. We had a few weeks ago of Nigeria having the highest heat of about 17.69 in the last 17 years. Will inflation also have a direct impact on the financial costs? If yes, what can be done to isolate such effects?
Okay, thanks. Inflation would impact on finance costs in the medium to long term, and I would say how it impacts. The first thing is, once inflation is high, the provider of capital will need to demand for higher rates,
Mm,
because I'm lending, you are borrowing from me, and I'm seeing inflation as at July was 19.6%, and we still expect it to peak at 21 plus before we may begin to come down.
mm,
So if I'm trying to invest in commercial paper, for instance, I'm looking at inflation on the other hand. So to see, yes, I may not be able to cover the inflation, get an investment that covers inflation, but I will need an investment that will help me close that gap to reduce my negative real return. So as you see, as inflation goes up, provider of capital will require for more money. It means that the cost of borrowing would also increase, which will now impact on productivity. So it's important. How can you hedge against it? We need to look at what are those factors that are fueling inflation.
mm,
So if I know that, I think imported inflation, looking at the basket, is about 30%. So
mm,
it means that there's an element FX plays in that, depreciation of the naira plays in inflation. So can I begin to diversify and look for a business that would also generate foreign
foreign
currency,
exchange rate.
so that I'm able to also earn on that? So if you have earned about, let's say, $100,000 since January, and you just kept it or invested it, when you look at the depreciation of the naira, it's close to about 12 to 15%, if not up to 20%, that you would have gained within the last 2 months or 3 months. So that can help reduce the capital, reduce the impact. Secondly, if you are also opportune to be able to lock in your rates, because most
Okay.
times, we saw last week, the CBN has increased interest rates on savings accounts from 1.4% to
Oh,
4.2%,
yeah.
which is 30% of MPR.
Mm,
So indirectly, deposit rates in banks would also increase. And as a result, because of also the tight liquidity in the system, we're already seeing pricing of commercial papers is being benchmarked to placement with banks, because the fund managers, the institutional investor, will tell you it's easier for me to take out my funds if I place it than lock it in 180 days or 270 days commercial paper that is not liquid. So
mm,
if I'm having placement at 15%, at 16% with a bank, and you're bringing out commercial paper, issuing commercial paper at 15, 16%, I'll prefer to lock in the funds in placements that I can terminate anytime. I may not be
mm,
able to sell my commercial paper. So it would influence that, Peter. And lastly, last way that I feel you may hedge is you can also look at raising long-term capital. For those that took
Mm.
advantage of the market in the last, let's say 2 years ago, when rates were very low, they were able to issue bonds, 7-year bonds at almost single digit rates. They have locked in that rate. And now that rates are almost getting to 15, almost
15, yeah.
20%, they continue to enjoy that
Enjoy it.
particular rate. So you can also think long term. And if you have that rating to be able to issue a corporate bond, you can also take advantage of that.
Very wonderful submission. And I want to believe that our viewers globally are tapping even from those explanations being provided by Mr. Ayodeji Ebo. Chike wants to have your response to this. He's asking what reason could make a company go into borrowing from external source rather than applying its retained earning?
Okay, thanks. Uh, uh, we've seen a few companies quoted on the Nigerian Stock Exchange adopt this process that you wonder why they pay 95% of their earnings as dividend and still borrow to finance their operations. I think one, when you look at some of these companies, they most of them are foreign affiliated. So they see dividend as one of the ethical way of taking out or extracting value from a business. MTN, for instance, has an average dividend payout ratio of 80%.
Hmm.
So for the shareholders, for them it's positive because out of the profit for that year, 80% is shared with shareholders, and they will go to the market to borrow, which may be expensive. But because they also have that leeway to be able to pass the cost to the consumers for some of them, or they look at their profitability and it can still accommodate it, then they wouldn't even bother. Because I know what will be running the mind of Mr. Okpala is that why the cost of retained earnings is almost zero and cost of borrowing is high.
Ah.
So they look at, if they still have that profitability, they have that ability, the margin on their business accommodates that. But what we've seen over time is, because for some of these companies are blue chip companies, they are also able to enjoy that low rate. So when you do a correlation of looking at debt impact on businesses, you see most time in the short run you don't enjoy the benefit, but over time in the long run you begin to see that benefit that is being accrued into the business. So I would say, wrapping up this, is that the strategy of the business is critical, and the strategy of the company is also very important. They will have their main reason why they believe that they can continue to use debt to grow the business, why they take out their profits.
Well explained by our guest today, Ayodeji Ebo. And I still have on the screen, all the way from Freetown, Dr. Abel is saying, he said some analysts have said that trading on debts, like you mentioned with Nestle as example, drives discipline and management efficiency. Firstly, do you share this perspective? If yes, what lesson can our current political leaders learn from this?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Abel. I totally agree with you that it enforces discipline. So I've seen business owners trying to set up a new business, they'll prefer to use their current asset as collateral and borrow to run that business, so that the operators of that business will know that this is not free cash,
Hmm.
and they are able to make money and pay back the loan. So I agree with you that it drives discipline. But the likes of Nestle, for instance, It's beyond just the discipline and efficiency. Netherlands shareholders in the Netherlands own a significant part of Nestle. You also know MTN, about 60 and it's over 60% are also owned by South Africans. So when they pay out dividend and they are able to they repatriate the dividend, they can use it for other things. So that's like one very straightforward way of extracting value from a business.
Mm.
Then now going straight to the lessons our leaders can take from this. I believe that what we need to focus more is what are the funds that we're borrowing, what are they being used for? Borrowing to pay salaries, borrowings to pay fuel subsidies, borrowing um, to even refinance the loans will not yield any economic benefits. We need to be able to discipline ourselves to borrow for productive sectors. If you want to subsidize, we need to begin to subsidize production and not consumption. It's limits when you look at countries that are still adopting subsidy, they subsidize more of production because that would create jobs, that would increase value, and even from the taxes that the government will earn if the business will grow, will be of good benefit to the overall economy.
Very wonderful submission. And I think that's the lesson you have actually deduced for our politicians and leaders listening and watching this. I think they have a take home there. We should borrow or even subsidize for production and not consumption so that we can have employment being generated and other things. I have Dr. Olanrewaju with a question. That's a member of the governing council of our institute, asking that what are the implications of having more than one exchange rate in a country? What can Nigeria do to streamline to just one?
Okay, good evening, doctor. I greet you, sir. And having multiple exchange rates brings confusion most times in the economy and gives opportunity for unethical practices. So you would see that with the current spread, if currently official rate is at 420 and the unofficial rate is at 690, depending on the market, whether it's cash dollars or inflow dollars, the incentive, that's like 300 naira difference.
Difference,
So
yeah.
everyone, most people would try to do anything to assess that official rate. Even if you don't, even as a business, if you don't do anything with it, 300 naira spread on $1 is too significant, and it will be creating artificial demand. So, and for businesses, when you look at from the foreign investors, sometimes there's also confusion. So which rate you are trying to sign an agreement and you're asking which rate should we agree? Is it the NAFEX rate? Is it the retail SME rate? Is it the CBN rate? So when you have various rates, it also causes confusion. But what we've seen in recent times that most Nigerians have been doing, even for those businesses, are using weighted average because CBN currently is rationing FX and they are not supplying. So if you are going to import raw materials, you may have to queue for months. So they have a lot of users of FX have moved the demand, call it demand shift, have moved to the unofficial market. So you see inflow dollars coming at a premium to the Aboki dollars, which is the cash dollars, because of the demand, because they need to continue to produce. So they will not wait and be getting the 5 or 10% per auction that you get from the CBN because
The
of
CBN.
rationing. So at the end of the day, your average cost, by the time you look at the 690, you get maybe 90% at 690, you get 10% at the official
420.
rate. You will see that your average rate is around 600, and that would impact on prices. So I believe that for us to, one of the solutions to solving this pathetic problem is reducing the gap. If you notice from 2016, late 2016, 2017, and 2018, when the FX window was set up, you will discover that there was stability. Even if CBN is delaying, people would even go to the black market to buy because there was a time it was even trading cheaper than the CBN. So there will be a lot of stability. And what we are losing is when you look at remittances to Nigeria, based on estimate, about over $20 billion should be coming in through the official window if the spread is collapsed. So there would be natural liquidity beyond the one from FPIs that would come into the country if we are able to close that gap.
Oh, very wonderful submission. And I think this question I'm about to pose to you will also handle what Justice is saying. Mr. Ayodeji, as a financial expert, what will be your assessment of the general operating business climate in Nigeria today? Can we say it's good, it's fair, it's poor? Whichever your conclusion is, what do you think? Why do you think so?
I think in my view, I would say it's really poor
Hmm.
because it makes us uncompetitive to other countries. So if you are producing in Nigeria, you need to provide your power. You need to, if you cannot provide your assets in terms of distribution, the cost of delivering goods is also very high. Some insecurity is also a major factor. So by the time you add on all these costs, it makes it almost impracticable to survive. This is excluding the borrowing cost, which is our major focus today. So by the time you had all these costs, you may not be profitable. You may not be able to compete favorably with our peers. So for us to be able to improve, there needs to be an enabling environment. Government needs to invest a lot, and that is why we are hoping that InfraCode, which the initiative, that's the Infrastructure Corporation Company,
Compression, yeah.
will take off, such that a lot of projects that would help businesses would be done. When you look at, there's a data that says the cost of importing goods from China to Nigeria is significantly less than taking it from Lagos to Kano. So it means we are the one paying for those inefficiencies. We have to pay for it. So if all those things, business owner, they'll reduce their margin so that they can survive. And the cost will also have to pay as Nigerians is also very high because of these inefficiencies. So I believe that there's a lot that still needs to be done for us to be able to, for businesses to survive so that employment can be generated. Because there's a strong correlation between job creation and insecurity. Government are focused
Very
on
well.
trying to earmark a lot of funding to insecurity. But if you don't create funding to improve on these businesses, it's like you are just you are not nipping the problem in the bud. You are just trying to just throw money at that problem,
The
and this
problem.
cost is not being handled.
That is very deep, and I want to believe that everybody will need to just buckle up on some of the things that they need to do. Uh, Felix Igodalo is asking, what's the economic policy of this government? I'm sure
It's like a rhetorical question. So I know
you, you,
there's been a lot of economic policy that have been set up. We know there was a time that during the COVID, that what we call the Economic Recovery Growth Plan. There's the MTEF document. There are several very good at formulating policies. It's only when it comes to implementation. So I wouldn't even, there's no new policy that we want to state here that the government doesn't know about. It is now the implementation that is very
implementation.
critical. We need to be deliberate. to implementing a lot of this. There was when you look at the economic recovery growth plan, that they were going to produce about 2 million solar panels. If we have done that enough, when you look at how we will be able to make income for those that will even be producing it, it will generate employment, and they will be able to tax, and also businesses or homes that will be using that, it will add value to them such that it will improve their livelihood. So there's a lot. You look at this school feeding program, it can be an economy on its own. Government is trying to feed millions of people. Can we ensure that everything that is being used is produced in Nigeria? That alone would generate like an economy that will ensure that everything, government import cars, can we ensure that they are patronize those that are producing in Nigeria, so that this money, even if government is spending, we feel they are spending a lot, there is also captured here. Some of the social intervention funds is also spent here, and when you do that, the economy will grow in itself. You would have millions of people producing egg for the pupils to eat, a lot of people, the rice, the beans. So you would see, when you look at the value chain, it's going to be like an economy on its own, that money here will create value rather than just giving people and not creating, giving people just some stipend and not creating value
Creating
with.
the job. That's a very wonderful submission. And I think a lot of analysts have actually got that right to say, let's domesticate most of the things that create that productive environment where employment can be, generated and grow. Paul is asking this question, and I'm just going through it, that what is the finance minister, budget administrator, and finance specialist in government affairs doing to arrest the situation when it is obvious that the right financing is not being done? I'm sure you, Paul, Mr. Ayodeji, you will not know their mind, but I know he will speak to that. I know he will speak to that.
Okay, thanks. I think that the finance minister, she's also trying her best to see how they can bring costs down, also with the DMO. If not, we would have seen a significant increase in interest rates. So when you study the auctions, which are the prime market auction for bonds and treasury bills, they are always mindful of the clearing rate, stop rate, or you call it marginal rates. So they have been mindful. I think 2 or 3 years ago too, they tried to also balance the mix between domestic and external debt because of the impact. I think currently is about 60-40 ratio, domestic to external. And even within that external, also 40% is the commercial angle, which is Euro bonds. They try to see how they want to reduce the cost. I think I read, I don't know how true it is, some days ago, that Nigeria, the government is trying to approach IMF. Reason to approach IMF now rather than the Euro bond is because of cost of funds. Because currently yields on Euro bond is almost in their 16 to about 20%. Compared to last year, they still raised fund at single digits. So they are mindful of that. But there's a limit to which the ministry can also do. I'm not speaking for them. And yes, they are supposed to advise, but there will also be money is not coming in anywhere. I think what we have not even discussed and everyone is shying away from is the oil theft. It means money is being stolen from source. What normally we produce, collect, comes into the federation is shared, and there may be leakages. But now it's not even coming from source, and
From
there's
source.
what I call like a double whammy. We are not getting the money from oil because of oil theft, and we are paying high subsidies. So you would see that is a crisis situation. Not trying to be pessimistic, but you are not, the little you are generating is also going away in form of subsidies. And when you look at the quantity of consumption, petroleum consumption, we will know that we are just funding for neighboring countries, because the number of cars in Nigeria, when you look at the statistics, and even the industry will not be able to consume what we claim as being consumed for petrol. It means that there's also a bit of leakages in that space that also need to be handled. So it means nothing is coming to the government and they have to borrow to do everything.
It's very, very deep. You see, one thing about the program is that once we start, time is not always our friend. But because I still have a lot to talk about. Talk about the finance, add its impact and everything. But we have just an hour to do justice to this. In closing, let me just believe that my producer and the chief editor of this program will definitely contact to bring you back to do more justice in depth into this. But in closing, what should the professional accountant do or watch out for in order to enhance the growth and profitability of business in Nigeria in relation to finance costs? Please do that in a minute.
Okay, thanks. I think it's to ensure that they keep records. A lot of businesses, and thankfully we're accountants to help people, guide them to keep records so that when you are going to borrow, it will increase your rating and you'll be able to borrow at a cheaper rate. If you don't have records that you have been selling in the last 5 years and you are just saying business is good, then nobody, even if you access the bank, they will not be too comfortable to borrow you funds. So try to keep records and also monitor the performance of your businesses. Track them. Even if you are making a loss, track them and see how you want to grow out of that loss. So it's important that you understand your position. And because we accountants, we're expected to keep those records and we'll be able to help those businesses, whether we are supporting or it's our business, to also grow out. Because once we have understanding of the current position, it will really help us to make informed decision, whether to even scrap or change business that you are doing or change strategy to improve and add value to that business.
It's been a very wonderful session with Mr. Ayodeji Ebo. Today, talking on the implication of finance cost on businesses. And I want to tell you, you need to come back again and talk to our members on this. And you rounded up in a very, very, very submissive way to say, as accountant, our role is very much important because for every business to survive, we need to keep records, not just keeping the record, monitor the performance of it. I want to sincerely appreciate you for creating time to come and educate and enlighten our members today, knowing fully well that when next we call, you will definitely honor our invitation, Mr. Ivo.
Thank you so much, and it's my honor to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. On this note, before I wind up, let me quickly give you a brief announcement. Let me say again that the World Congress for Accountants will be holding from the day of 18th day to 21st November in Joe World Convention Center, Mumbai, in Indian. You know the role that the Institute of Chartered Accountant plays is very, very strategic, and the team is building trust for sustainability growth. So we want you to visit our website and check on all our social media handles for contact regarding the World Congress for Accountants. And in a very short while, you heard at the beginning, the 52nd Annual Accountant Conference is coming up October 10 to 14 at the Abuja International Conference Center. We will be talking on Nigeria adopting sustainability for economic prosperity. The 58th president will definitely be waiting to host you at that particular conference. And on the final note, the ICAN pathway. The governing council has just approved the new pathway for members of the approved IFAC recognized PAOs to become ICAN members. Such person must demonstrate practical work experience through examination of experience. You can always visit our portal on icanportal.org/members/pathway or contact the membership department of our great institute. On this note, I will be winding up for today, the Tuesday, 23rd day of the month of August, to connect back with you on Thursday, the 25th day, when I'll be bringing to you another interesting session. Stay safe till Thursday. I remain your host, Olusesan Okwade. Bye for now.
Save the date. Make it in October to remember as you register and plan to attend the 52nd ICAN Annual Accountants Conference. Date 10th to 14th October 2022. Venue ICC Abuja and Sheraton Abuja. For more inquiries, call 070-501-80222 or 090-625-47263. You can also visit the ICAN website www.icanig.org to register. Thank you.